There's a story from my hometown that people still argue about sometimes because even now, it sounds too strange to be real. It happened at a public park near the edge of town sometime in the late summer of 2014. Not during some dramatic storm, not during a big event, not during anything important at all. That's probably part of why the story stayed with people so strongly. Because life-changing things are almost never polite enough to happen when you're emotionally prepared for them. Most people there that afternoon were doing exactly what people always do at neighborhood parks: watching children, walking dogs, trying unsuccessfully to relax while pretending not to check their phones every 30 seconds. The park itself wasn't anything special either, just one of those medium-sized suburban parks with faded playground equipment, uneven basketball courts, and picnic tables that always smelled vaguely like sunscreen and old wood during the summer. There was a duck pond near the walking trail too, though half the ducks were usually aggressive enough that children avoided feeding them. The woman at the center of the story was named Claire. At the time, she was 31 years old and had recently moved back into town after a divorce. According to people who knew her, Claire had always been one of those women who looked emotionally exhausted, even when smiling. Not unhappy exactly, just tired, in a very permanent kind of way. She worked as a dental hygienist 3 days a week and spent most afternoons watching her 6-year-old son Liam at the park because he had become obsessed with the swings that summer. Apparently, he insisted the blue swing specifically went higher than the others, even though they were literally identical. Claire used to sit on the same bench almost every afternoon around 4 o'clock, drinking iced coffee and reading paperback mystery novels while Liam played nearby. That routine became important later. The other person in the story was a man named Daniel. Daniel was 31 too, though obviously neither of them knew that yet. He had moved into town only a few months earlier after accepting a mechanic position at an auto shop 2 counties over. People described Daniel as quiet, but strangely warm once he relaxed around you. He had this habit of laughing while talking whenever he got nervous, which made serious conversations sound unintentionally cheerful. Daniel usually brought his golden retriever Murphy to the same park after work because Murphy apparently became destructive if he skipped evening walks. That's how the whole thing started, not with some cinematic revelation, with a dog. Murphy had slipped his leash chasing ducks near the pond and ran directly through the playground area while Daniel jogged behind him, apologizing to basically everybody in sight. At one point, Murphy jumped onto the same bench Claire was sitting on, nearly knocking her iced coffee into her lap. Claire later joked that her first thought was that the dog had the eyes of a tax evader. Daniel finally caught up completely out of breath and started apologizing so aggressively that Claire actually laughed. And according to Claire, that's when the strange feeling hit her. Not immediately when she saw him, when he laughed, because it sounded weirdly familiar. Not familiar like recognizing an old friend. More unsettling than that, like hearing your own voice played back unexpectedly. Claire apparently stared at him long enough afterward that Daniel eventually asked if they had met before. She told him no, but then Daniel looked confused for a second and asked, "Sorry if this sounds weird, but are you related to somebody named Susan?" Claire nearly dropped her drink. Susan was her mother's name. Now here's where the story starts becoming genuinely unsettling. Daniel explained that Claire looked almost identical to photographs his adoptive parents once showed him of his biological mother when he was younger. At first, Claire assumed this had to be coincidence. People resemble each other all the time. But the longer they stood there talking near the playground, the stranger it became. Same eyes, same smile, same slight gap between their front teeth, even the same nervous habit of rubbing the backs of their hands while speaking. Claire later admitted the thing that disturbed her most was realizing they tilted their heads the exact same way whenever listening carefully. Tiny unconscious things. The kinds of things people don't usually learn from imitation. Meanwhile, Liam apparently kept staring back and forth between them before finally asking, "Mom, why does he look like your brother?" Children say things adults spend hours trying to avoid. That line basically shattered whatever emotional distance remained between them. Claire called her mother that evening after returning home and awkwardly explained the encounter over the phone. At first, her mother became strangely quiet, not confused. Quiet. And according to Claire, that silence lasted long enough that she already knew something was wrong before her mother spoke again. What happened next unraveled nearly 32 years of family history in less than a week. Claire's mother eventually admitted that before Claire was born, she had delivered twins unexpectedly during a complicated pregnancy while struggling financially and emotionally after Claire's biological father disappeared. One baby stayed with her, the other was quietly placed for adoption through a private arrangement she almost never discussed afterward. That baby was Daniel. Claire later said the hardest part wasn't anger exactly. It was realizing her mother had carried that grief silently for decades without ever fully speaking about it. Daniel took the news strangely calmly at first, almost too calmly. One of his friends later said Daniel reacted the way some people do after minor car accidents, where the shock delays everything emotional. He just kept asking practical questions: dates, hospitals, paperwork, timelines. But underneath all that calmness, something huge had clearly shifted inside him. A DNA test was scheduled mostly because everybody involved needed undeniable proof before emotionally accepting something that massive. The waiting period apparently became unbearable. Claire and Daniel kept meeting at the park almost every evening during that week because neither of them fully knew what else to do. And honestly, some of those meetings were apparently awkward beyond belief. People imagine emotional reunions becoming instantly magical. Real life usually isn't that graceful. Sometimes they talk nonstop for hours. Sometimes conversations stalled completely. There were moments where they accidentally spoke over each other using nearly identical phrasing. Moments where they laughed at the same thing slightly too hard because the situation itself felt unreal. One evening, Daniel brought old family photographs from childhood, and the two of them sat side by side on the same park bench, comparing pictures while Murphy slept near their feet. There's apparently one photograph that made Claire start crying almost immediately. It showed Daniel, around age 10, holding a birthday cake beside his adoptive parents. Not because the photo itself was sad, because Daniel looked exactly like Claire's son, Liam. The resemblance was almost uncomfortable. Same eyes, same smile, same expression. Claire later said it felt like staring into some alternate version of her own family that existed without her knowledge for decades. The DNA results finally arrived the following Thursday. Positive match. Fraternal twins. The park reunion story spread through town almost immediately after that, partly because it was emotional, but mostly because people became obsessed with how statistically impossible it felt. Two strangers, unknowingly living in the same town, same park, same afternoons, same age, and somehow recognizing each other anyway. But honestly, what stayed with me most wasn't the DNA results. It was what happened afterward, because the reunion itself didn't magically fix everything. That's another thing movies lie about. There was grief involved too, a lot of it. Claire struggled with resentment toward her mother for a while. Daniel quietly wrestled with questions about identity that apparently left him emotionally exhausted for months afterward. Even their relationship with each other took time to become natural. They weren't suddenly best friends overnight. They were strangers, carrying pieces of the same history. That's complicated. But slowly, something real started forming between them. Sunday dinners, birthdays, small routines. Daniel teaching Liam how to fix bicycles. Claire calling Daniel whenever her car made strange noises. Inside jokes nobody else fully understood. Tiny, ordinary things. And weirdly enough, I think those mattered more than the dramatic reunion itself. Because family usually isn't built through huge emotional speeches. It's built through repetition, showing up repeatedly over time. There's one detail Claire mentioned years later during a local newspaper interview that honestly stuck with me more than anything else. She said that a few months after the DNA results, she caught herself absent-mindedly reaching for her phone after hearing good news at work because her first instinct had suddenly become, "I should tell Daniel." Not because she was trying to force a sibling relationship, because somewhere along the way, it had become real naturally. Daniel eventually moved only a few streets away from Claire and Liam. Murphy still goes to the same park too, though he's old now. Claire once joked that the dog technically reunited the family and therefore deserved partial credit during holidays. And according to Daniel, one of the strangest parts of the entire experience happened almost a year later when he accidentally caught his own reflection beside Claire's in a restaurant window while they were laughing about something stupid. For a second, he said it genuinely startled him all over again because after growing up feeling like something about his identity never fully fit together, there was suddenly another person in the world whose existence explained things he never had words for before. And honestly, I think that's what makes this story stay with people. Not coincidence, not biology, just the idea that sometimes, completely by accident, life gives people back pieces of themselves they didn't even realize were missing.